Hello there. I forgot to do this yesterday. Didn't get done yesterday. Kind of feel bad about that because that means I didn't take my pills yesterday, which is not good. And I should be doing this twice a day. Just so you know, when I do these, unless things change, if I'm only doing one shots, that means I'm not doing it right. For the record, it is Saturday night / Sunday morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. Remember that thing I said happens? That thing I said that happens when I don't take my blood pressure meds or my Effexor. Oh look, I said Effexor for the first time ever rather than Wellbutrin. It's Effexor XR, not Wellbutrin. Anyway, I've already taken myself on a tangent. I don't even remember what I was going to say. Totally forgot. Oh yeah, it was the first time ever, I think, that I actually said Effexor rather than Wellbutrin. It's never been Wellbutrin. It's always been Effexor. Anyway, it's 3 a.m. Sunday morning. I just finished watching Fruits Basket Season 3. Such a touching show. I wish there was a Season 4 or 5. So I want to see what happens next. Ooh. I mean, we know that Kyo and Toru lived happily ever after because the very last scene is them as grandparents. Very touching, very happy, very cute, whatever. All right, whatever. But what about everybody else? Their grandparents are still together. They had a family. That's awesome. But what about everybody else? I want to know what happened to Momiji. I want to know what happened to Yuki and his girlfriend. I want to know what happens. You know, don't fast forward like that. I just let it be to be continued. I want to see them as adults. You know, so sad. So sad that it's over. Do you ever watch a TV show like that when it's over? I mean, there's a lot of conflict and a lot of mystery and a lot of emotions and whatever. But when it's over, you're like, sad. Maybe that's what they felt when the bond was broken. Each one of them, when they were very sad. Clue what I'm talking about, because unless you've seen the show that I'm talking about, which is called Fruits Basket, it's an anime. Unless you've watched all 3 seasons, the 2019 version, then you have no idea what I'm talking about. I want to see more. I want to watch more. I came this close to signing up to Crunchyroll, and I think I may still, because there's a prequel, and I want to see that. And you can't see it without signing up to Crunchyroll. I want to see the prequel. But still, I mean, the prequel is an hour and a half. I'm still going to be left wanting more. All right, let me shut up and take my pills. Wow, I almost choked. All right, there. I've taken them all. You know, I realize this is a closet and it's not really an office, but this is my studio, okay? This is my YouTube studio. So I need to like clean this up a little bit, do some laundry. I already have plans. I've been eyeing this low table, like a Japanese style table that is pretty low, and something I can sit on to make my ass a little higher from the floor, because this leg is not happy. This leg does not like to be, I mean, this one is like super down on the floor. All of the tendons and the muscles are relaxed here. This leg knows how to do this. This one does not know how to do this. See, this is why when I'm on the video, this thing is like up here, and you don't get to see this one because this one's all the way down here, but this one won't go down. That said, though, it's gotten a lot better. It has gotten better since I started. It needs to like relax more. It needs to go like, yeah, my knee doesn't like this. So I already have my eye on, it's kind of like a Japanese style low table. They're on Amazon. If you search Amazon for, oh wow, my door just opened. It's like some kind of a, is there an animal? Because, okay, there is an animal. Hello, kitty. Oh look, both my cats are here now. Will I be able to show my other cat on video for once? We'll see if she comes closer to me. That would be nice because you guys have already met Zelda, but you've never met Link. Anyway, I'm going to continue on as though she's not here. Maybe she'll come over. She's a very skittish cat, so if I were to get up and go for her, she would just take off. There's no catching this cat. She doesn't want to be caught. Maybe I should turn the camera around. Yeah! Let's do that. Okay, hold on. That's Zelda, and you know her. And that's Link, all the way over there. Linko. Meow. Meow. A little better. Marginally. I got way too much dirty clothes. Way too much. Today's Saturday, and I was up all night last night, and I finally fell asleep. I don't know what time. But I woke up at 3 p.m. Saturday, today. And, I'm not even gonna... I haven't really been worrying about that. Like the insomnia, not being able to sleep at the right time, wasn't really something that I fretted about when I woke up at 3 p.m. Now, if my son had been home, he's not with me this weekend, but if he had been home, I would have been a little upset that I did that. But, I've got 2 adult daughters. One of them didn't even sleep here last night. The other one is 21 years old. She can figure it out. My adult daughters are aware of my insomnia issues of late. So at least they know that I've been having issues with that. And so if I'm sleeping until 3 p.m., they're not wondering, hey, is she sick or what's going on? At least they know what's up. Oh, I was talking about the table, so let me finish that. So if you search Amazon for Japanese style low table, you'll find these little tables that are really close to the ground, like a foot off the ground. And the one that I've been eyeing, I actually put it into my shopping cart. I haven't purchased it yet because the price of it is ridiculous. But ordinarily, I wouldn't hesitate to spend the money. But now I think maybe I have to rethink things. So anyway, I've taken my evening pills. I have not taken melatonin. I don't know if that's a good idea at this point. Really, if I stuck to my 8 p.m. routine, then I would take that. At this point, I don't know if it's a good idea to take it now or not, because I think that in a couple hours I'll be sleeping anyway, whether I take it or not. So I'm really behind on the video editing and need to stop effing around and get shit done that I know I should need to get done. All right, I'm not even going to have that conversation because I've said that shit so many times in the last 4 weeks. I'm done saying it again. I'm going to show you how cute these fracking cats are. Can I zoom in? Is there any way to zoom in on this thing? Is she cute or what? Look at her. She's got 2 haunches. She's so weird. Yep. Now she's rubbing her cheeks against the camera. Time to get back in bed. Let's go.